The Holiday Bowl, we often refer to it as the Miracle Bowl, was a special time for all of us. And I really would like to share with you a special moment, a special person that was critical to that team and our success. His name is Mel Farr. Many people have seen the video of the post game when BYU miraculously came back and won the game. And you see the video of LaVell Edwards walking out on the field to see the coach, the head coach of SMU, and shake his hand. But on his way, there was a young man, looks like a child, that jumped up on Coach Edwards and wrapped himself around Coach Edwards' neck. And Coach Edwards kind of unceremoniously pushed him off because he had to go shake hands with Coach Meyer from SMU. Well, that person has sometimes been excoriated for who let that guy out on the field to disrupt Coach Edwards. That special person was Mel Farr. Mel is a diminutive guy, co-student with us at BYU, who was our equipment manager. But Mel was a unique character. First of all, he was only 5'4". He had a speech impediment. And from some youth childhood diseases, he suffered from a lot of things, including a limp. But here he was among these quote-unquote giants on the football field, young men with big athletic bodies generally. And your first impression was, what is this guy doing out here? But that was just your first impression. The second impression was what demonstrated Mel's heart. Mel was a critical part of our team. It was interesting, an event that happened in one of the very first practices that we had, and Mel was our equipment manager, so his responsibility was placing the ball down between every play in practice. And so one of our players, maybe the most humorous guy on the team, Jim McMahon, teased him, as I recall, standing there with the rest of the players. And Jim, I forget what it was just a gentle tease, but Mel turned around and defended himself, maybe even pointing at Jim. And I remember how you could tell Jim was at the same time more respectful because Mel was defending himself with vigor and also kind of inclusive, like, okay, this guy's on our team. And indeed that year, Mel Farr was on our team. So much so that by the end of the season, he, as the best mascot or the best good luck charm, tried to do everything he could to help us win the game, and he did by doing kind of a miraculous thing, tearing in half the San Diego telephone book the night before the game. It took him a lot of effort. It took a lot of determination. He was tempted by others to quit, but he indeed finished. And as a perfect metaphor for our game, we also didn't quit, and we miraculously finished with a victory. And you can almost say it was Mel Farr who showed us the way. So when Mel Farr jumped on LaVell's neck, LaVell wasn't disrespectful of Mel, but LaVell, I know, had a great respect and love for Mel. Now that we've set the stage, I want you to meet Mel Farr. We have him here in our home, and I'm grateful that he's here. You can also read the article that Vaisakama wrote in the Deseret News that we're linking to our podcast. Welcome. I'm Mike Lacey, and I am so grateful to have one of the icons of BYU football from back in the day, Mr. Mel Farr. Mel, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You know, it's funny and very interesting. One day I was on Cougar Board, and Cougar Board is where a lot of BYU fans meet together on social media, right? And so there was somebody who asked the question. It's a social media place. Someone had this video of after the SMU game. And there's a video on ESPN called The Greatest Bowl Comeback Ever. And so I'll show Mel, and our editor will show this on the screen. Here's the final field goal. And so
Extra point.
Thank you, Mel.
There's the different thing.
And here's LaVell Edwards walking out to the middle of the field, and somebody's jumping on LaVell Edwards' shoulders. And then LaVell sloughs him off because LaVell has to go out and meet Coach Meyer from SMU, right?
Right.
And I remember somebody said, who was that jumped on LaVell Edwards? Don't they, how did he get out there?
They thought I was a fan.
They thought you were a really fast fan. Now, you're pretty fast, Mel, aren't you?
I was.
You were. In fact, didn't you have to run out on the field quite frequently?
Yeah, to get the tee. Yeah.
To get the tee after our kickoffs.
And field goals.
And no, there wasn't we did put a tee down for field goals, didn't we?
Well, a kickoff tee. After you've made the field goal, you have to kick off again.
That's right. Oh, so you brought it out there too.
No, went and got it. The kickers would take them out, and I would bring it in and give it back to the kickers.
Okay.
And Lee Johnson, this is Lee Johnson, not Brent Johnson.
Right.
Would forget that. Then he would leave it when I was down visiting the games years after I was down there.
So I remember one game when I ran out on the field playing offense or defense, I forget what it was, and the tee was still out there. Did you ever leave the tee out on the field?
No, I didn't. It must have been after my days.
It must have been after your days, right? Because Mel never would have forgotten that.
That's right.
But there was one problem. Our offense scored so much back then.
It was fun.
That our kickoff team was on the field quite a bit, right?
Right.
So that means Mel Farr, famous Mel Farr, or were you infamous?
I was infamous, whatever that means.
Well, infamous means you're famous for all the wrong reasons, kind of. So it's a funny word. But Mel Farr, and one of the things I wanted to reveal to our audience that I'm aware of is that there's a movie coming out or anticipated. The screenplay is all written, and they're choosing the actors right now. Here we are in the spring, almost summer of 2024. And this is about that great year in 1980 when BYU beat SMU.
The Pony Express, as they called them.
The SMU Mustangs, which were called the Pony Express.
Because of Eric Dickerson, Craig James looked like 400 pounds each, running backs.
They were big running backs. They didn't look like 400 pounds.
Well,
they were built well. In fact, you said something about LaVell Edwards in the elevator. Tell us that story, Mel.
He thought he saw...
And this was probably at Jack Murphy Stadium during the week of the game.
Right.
And it was interesting that the San Diego Chargers were playing the day after we were. The day after the Holiday Bowl, the San Diego Chargers were playing. Right. So what happened on the elevator that you're aware of?
Coach Edwards thought they were here for the next game for the San Diego Chargers.
And this is Craig James and Eric Dickerson, right?
Right, because they were so big. And then the next year, the NCAA gave SMU the death penalty.
Why? Do you know why?
The next year.
Right.
where they couldn't recruit a lot of people.
Because that team had been paid a lot of money,
Right.
supposedly. And,
Supposedly, I don't know.
Proven. It was proven, and that's why that famous NCAA infraction penalty was given to SMU, because they were a phenomenally good team.
Right.
A phenomenally good team. And they had players like Craig James and Eric Dickerson, who were built more, in my opinion, more like Greyhounds. And they ran the field like Greyhounds. And then Michael Carter and so many other really strong and good players. I respect that team. And it was quite a miracle. And it's called the Miracle Bowl. Right. Quite a miracle that we were able to come back and win.
Yeah. Jim McMahon threw it to Clay Brown. Clay Brown caught it. And so we were all tied, and then they kicked the extra point for the winning.
To win the game.
Right. Actually, time is expired, so you have to finish with the extra point. So
there were 3 seconds on the clock when we ran our last play, which was a Hail Mary pass from Jim McMahon to Clay Brown, won the game. And so the title of that ESPN YouTube tape was it the greatest comeback ever? Of course it was. Is there any question about that?
I don't think so, but other people disagree.
I'm sure. But let me finish on this movie, because Mel Farr, what were the years that you did what you did for the football program?
From 1977 through, I can't remember what year, until the tradition of being Utah quit. I would tear it for every Utah game, and they were big phone books.
Okay, let me interrupt Mel, because I think you were there from 1977 to 1981, right?
Yeah, but it was continue on after that until we stopped beating Utah.
So Mel, there's a famous tradition that we had on the in the team. It'll probably be revealed in the movie, but we all know as football players that Mel would get up in front of us. Now, Mel is a little bit bigger man today as far as what you're built like than you were back then. You could run out on the field and get that place kicking tee. You spoke and acted just like you do now back then.
Right.
And
I'm a fruitcake.
You were one of the most unique guys on our team. And so I guess I'm going in several tangents here, but on Cougar Board, when they said, who was that guy who jumped on LaVell Edwards, I had to respond. I said, well, that was Mel Farr. And Mel Farr's story and his impact on our team was significant. And one of your impacts, I think it's kind of a smaller impact, was what you did before the SMU game, and it became a tradition. Tell us what your...
Actually, the tradition started when we were playing Utah.
Okay.
Each year. And the first year I played against you, well, I was part of the team.
Our team played.
In 1977, I would tear it before the Utah game.
You're talking about the phone book. You would literally tear the phone book. How would you tear the phone book? Because which phone book, for example, was this? The Salt Lake City phone book?
Well, in San Diego, when we played, it was the San Diego phone book.
And back then, now people who are millennials may not remember. No, millennials probably remember phone books. Probably Gen Z people don't even remember phone books.
Right.
But phone books were thick books, bigger than this, but they were sometimes 3 or 4 inches thick, full of kind of thin, really thin paper.
And it took technique and restraint. And I have never given the secret up.
You haven't? So there's a special technique in ripping that phone book in half.
Some people go down, whatever you call this.
The middle, or okay.
The side.
Yeah.
Which is easier.
Through the binding? Oh, you mean, okay.
if you're holding a phone book like that and you go through this way, that's the easy way.
But you didn't do it the easy way.
The hard way.
You did the hard way. Now, here, as a football player, let me share, because, we're all young men in our prime, lifting weights significantly. There were guys on the team who could bench press even more than 450 pounds. I remember Pulusila Filiaga had the record for bench press, and these guys did squats and deadlifts and everything that were just unbelievably strong. There were guys on our team that were super strong, but none of us could replicate, or at least I don't think any of us could replicate, Mel Farr, who certainly didn't have the height of any of the football players, right? How tall are you, Mel? Or how tall were you back then?
I came home from my mission 5 feet, 4.5 inches, 110 pounds, 4% body fat.
110 pounds.
Lean machine.
And lean machine, right? In fact, you were telling me, and we've talked about it with other players, at the beginning of every season, we would run the 2 mile. It was just a tradition. Even the guys from Florida and California, we would land here, Provo's at 4,500 feet elevation, and we all had to run the 2 mile. Mel, why did you run the 2 mile?
Just to prove I was part of the team.
Really?
And I would run it for the first 3 or 4 years. And then after that, I said, I proved enough.
You had already proved enough. Was 2 miles a long run for you?
Yes.
Really?
And the first year I did it, I was sore.
Really? For how long?
I don't remember.
For days?
For days at least.
Okay. And it was funny talking to a few of the players on our offensive line. You remember guys like Tom Bell, and you remember Danny Hansen. TB. You remember Danny Hansen and Scott Nielsen.
Right.
But they were part of an offensive line that included Nick Eyre.
Right.
Do you remember Nick Eyre?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Of those 4 men, offensive linemen, who was the biggest?
I don't know.
Nick Eyre, it had to be I thought he was more like 6'8".
And you don't forget the defense with Mike Morgan, who was called Animal.
We had defensive linemen that were strong and aggressive, right?
Right.
And Mike Morgan was one of those guys. I think he's a coach, maybe still.
I don't know.
In high school. Yeah, that's good. But these offensive linemen, and every position group had to run the 2 mile in a different time. There were different levels that you had to achieve,
right,
or you had to do it again.
And also, like the running backs would run it, and then the DBs would run it, and so forth. And there was a story about Tom Holmoe in the Miracle Bowl game. I tore the phone book, and then I threw the loose pages and kept the other book. And
the other half of the book?
And Roger French, who was the line coach, kept it in his belt during the game.
Really?
And I don't know whatever happened to it, but Tom Holmoe for years kept the page. And you'll have to ask him the story.
I will.
And stuff.
Well, it was a significant event because I remember, the San Diego phone book is an extremely large phone book back then. And Mel's hands aren't the biggest hands in the world. And so he had to get his hands around that phone book and have enough strength and grip to actually rip those pages in whatever his special technique was, right?
Right. And the thing is, they had me stand on the table, around the banquet table, so I could do it, so everybody could see him, and everybody was on. And
we were yelling and screaming and cheering you on,
and
right?
Dan and Jim McMahon came at one time.
Jim McMahon, what did he do?
He came to try to help me, and I swatted him like a fly. And Coach Edwards thought, oh, no, there's my quarterback.
Yeah, what if you injured our quarterback?
I didn't, though.
He was worried about that, though.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
He was sweating bullets.
Ha, ha, ha. Coach Edwards was worried that Mel had disabled our famous quarterback from
Jim
1980.
McMahon.
Jim McMahon.
Jim McMahon.
He was wild?
Yeah.
All right, we're taking no. Jim McMahon was one of those mild mannered. I remember.
No.
I think you have a story. Now we contacted Jim McMahon before this because Mel didn't want to tell this story unless he got approval from Jim.
And we got approved.
We got him because he has a story. Share your story.
Okay.
Of what you remember.
Practice at one of the practice. I can't remember which practice. Jim McMahon started swearing up the storm at his linemen, and so Coach Edwards.
Now let me interrupt you. You said swearing up a storm at his lineman. That's interesting because I always remember I remember at BYU and then at Chicago Bears, his linemen loved him, right? He was
upset that they weren't blocking.
They weren't doing what they were supposed to, so he held them accountable that day.
Right, and he started swearing.
Language.
Yeah, and so Coach Edwards sent him home and said, "Come to my house, and I'll talk to you later."
So Coach Edwards. Where was Coach Edwards when Jim was doing this?
Observing practice.
From kind of far away or close?
Semi-close.
Okay, so what did he do? Did he yell? Did he run up to Jim?
No, he went up to him and say, "I want to see you at my house after practice."
Really? So he said, "Go home right now and meet me after practice at my
go
house."
to the showers and stuff. So anyway, and then the offensive coordinator up until the last year I was there with Doug Schofield, may his soul rest in heaven, was the offensive coordinator.
Right.
And then a guy named Wally English was one. And then, I can't remember who was the last one I was with.
Was it Ted Tollner or Mike Holmgren?
Mike Holmoe.
And he became a famous offensive coach and coach for the Packers.
Right.
You know, Mel, we had such wonderful teammates and such strong leadership.
We sure did. You got to remember Bill Shefflin, when they played Hawaii, I can't remember what year, he jumped over time and pulled the quarterback, or Cherry, who was the quarterback of Hawaii, would have scored.
I remember that play. I don't think that was Bill Shefflin, though.
It was.
It was? Okay. Because the same kind of play happened in our national championship year, and we needed to beat Hawaii, and we stopped him on the goal line because our strong safety jumped over
and it was Bill
tackled
Shefflin.
Okay, so you're saying that was Bill Shefflin.
I could be wrong.
Well, I could be too. And maybe it happened twice because Bill Shefflin made some of the most phenomenal plays in history, including the block of the punt against SMU.
You brought that up. That's right.
And what a competitive and good young man, Bill Shefflin.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm talking about him back then. I guess I'd still consider him a good young man.
I do too, because he's younger than 69.
You're not 69.
Almost.
Hey, Mel, I'm curious because you went to BYU after your mission.
Right.
You weren't a track star.
No.
You weren't a football player.
No. But a football manager, that's different than a football player.
How did you become a football manager?
Well, my high school coach knew Coach Edwards, Ken Smith, who later became BYU linebacker coach many years after.
And then even I think he was defensive coordinator after Fred Whittingham left.
Right. And
so Ken Schmidt knew of you.
Well, I managed for him in football 3 years, and then managed several other sports at high school, and I just celebrated my 50th year Skyline High School. Anyway,
So how did Ken Schmidt got you on as an equipment manager?
Yeah.
Okay. No, not equipment manager, a football manager.
A football equipment manager.
Okay.
A student.
I just remember you there all the time, and it felt like you were there more than the other people. How did you become so close to the BYU football team?
As a kid, I wanted to be a great athlete, but I was too small. I graduated high school at 4 feet 9 inches, 4 feet 9.5 inches, about 90 pounds. Went up to the U for 3 quarters because I had a chance to manage their football team, and then switched and went down to BYU.
Okay.
So, but all the players I've been in contact with and knew were always friendly to me.
Why?
I don't know.
Were you friendly to them?
I try to be.
Okay. Now, I truly remember this, and you tell me, maybe you won't remember this, but it seems like there was a day near the beginning of one of my first seasons there when someone was maybe teasing you. Do you remember that?
I do. It was after practice, and they wanted to put me in a locker. Well, one of the players, I don't know who he was, I don't remember, said, "We don't treat Mel Farr like that."
Really?
Yeah. But
so he talked to the other players who were not treating you well.
Freshmen and so forth.
Oh, so these were younger players who didn't know you or know of you.
Right.
And some upperclassmen came and said, we don't treat Mel Farr like that.
Right.
I love that. How did you feel about that? What was your feeling?
I thought that was awesome because I was always picked on in junior high and high school until the football players stuck up for me in high school.
Now, let me tell a little story that I remember, and I could be wrong about this, and I didn't get permission from Jim McMahon. But I remember Jim McMahon was like this. Whoever was friends with Jim McMahon, I think it was because we all played baseball, and somehow, some way, baseball players always like to tease each other. And that means you like each other. When you pick on another guy for such, in teasing ways, not in abusive ways, not in the stuff you in a locker way, not that way. But I remember there was a time at the line of scrimmage, and Mel would often set the ball down at the line of scrimmage in practice, right?
Right.
And Jim McMahon was there. I don't know if this was spring or fall. And I think Jim McMahon was making fun of you. Do you remember that?
I don't remember him teasing
or maybe me. He was mimicking you or something. But he did that to all of us,
Right.
And what I remember Mel, and maybe it was someone who was with Jim, but you turned around and said something straight back to him with equal fervor. You didn't use bad language, but you were almost like you were teasing back. And every single one of us felt that kinship of, we love this guy because he was standing up for himself. Right. And I saw right then, now maybe that wasn't your first experience with Jim McMahon, but I saw the respect Jim had for you at that very moment. And it was almost like you were initiated into the brotherhood of the BYU football team.
Yeah, I always wanted to play many sports as I could, but I was too short and too skinny and stuff.
Who knows? Maybe you could have been a great point guard now.
Right. But I did meet Scott Runia and...
well, there was a Craig Christensen who was a guard back then, but I'm thinking of Steve Craig.
Right, Steve Craig.
Okay, so you met them.
Right.
And Scott Runia was here yesterday.
Well, he's awesome.
He is awesome. He was actually my roommate back at BYU before he and I both were married to our spouses. That sounds funny, doesn't it? It became a tradition that you would actually rip that phone book. And I want to finish that story because against San Diego State, the feeling in the room was interesting. You know, at first, we're all kind of loving it and we're playing along with Mel. He's suffering. But then you start feeling bad, like, oh, gee, he might not get it. And so literally, Jim McMahon came up and he was going to help you rip it, right?
And I said no. And
you swatted him away.
And Ryan Tibbetts, may his soul rest in heaven,
Tibbetts
thought we'd have to call an ambulance.
Yeah, because everybody knew that Mel Farr had we called it a forearm shiver back then.
Right.
That if you took the forearm shiver from Mel Farr, you might be disabled. You might have to go to the hospital, right? Right. And so that became a focal point for our BYU football program. Mel Farr, diminutive Mel Farr, standing in front of the team and ripping this phone book. And what was so cool about that particular event is after Mel rejected Jim McMahon's offer to help, and now we as a team are all kind of suffering with Mel because you wonder, oh, man, maybe not get it. Wasn't a big deal to us if you didn't, but you were trying with all of your heart.
And I keep saying, never give up, never give up, never give up.
Yeah.
And I finally tore it, and I kept the one with the binder.
With the binding, right.
And through the other pages, someone up in the light loft.
Right.
And
he threw the rest of the pages in the air. Mel, what I remember is that you struggled. It looked like that phone book had beaten you.
But
But the phone book did not beat Mel Farr. He kept fighting, rejected any nefarious help, and eventually tore that book in half.
And I kept mumbling, never give up, never give up. And we never gave up.
And so he completes the circle here. We didn't give up, and it was the Miracle Bowl because being down by significant points with very little time left relative to how many points needed to be scored, and BYU at that moment also did not give up and won the game, ripped the phone book and won a huge football game.
Right.
Mel Farr, we did not know that you were the guy, the precursor to what would happen that night or that week when BYU, I think it was that night that we played.
Well, we played Friday night, but Thursday night was the team meeting.
That's when you tore the phone book?
Right.
You have an excellent memory.
So.
Well, here's what's interesting is those years from 1977 to 1981 included some phenomenal football games and seasons.
Right.
But that SMU game and then that particularly a particular event where Mel tore the phone book is so interesting that my understanding, and we talked about it a moment ago, is that there is a movie prepared that will witness that team, that season, that game through the eyes of Mel Farr. And I'm so excited about the potential for that movie. And it's funny that my wife and I lived in Farmington, New Mexico for a long time. And Jenny James at that time was someone that my wife Diana was the young women's leader for. You know, she's just one of our young ladies there. And now she's a famous author of books for women or young women. And she's also written the screenplay for this movie that I'm so excited about. And who knows, maybe it could come out this fall, kind of a synopsis of that old 1980 team as seen through the eyes of, what would we call Mel Farr? Because you're so much more than an equipment manager.
Well, I'll just say sports, football equipment manager, because I couldn't do. In fact, I had the basketball coach at that time. I can't remember who it was, wanted me to manage basketball, and I said, how can I go to school and manage basketball too? And the baseball coach, Coach Gary Pullen, wanted me to do baseball, and I couldn't do that.
Well, Mel, this has been very, very fun having you on the show. I'm curious if you'd like to share any final thoughts.
Well, Brother Jay, as we call him, which was Floyd Johnson, the main equipment for I don't remember how many years.
Floyd Johnson, we've talked about Floyd before, but a wonderful man and our equipment manager at BYU.
For all the sports.
For all the sports.
Both men and women.
That's correct.
And he was a wonderful young man. And Coach Edwards, I was very loved him. And he passed away, but Patty's still around.
That's right. Well, Mel Farr was a guy who was a person who a lot of people misunderstood when they looked at our program and our people. I think a lot of people misunderstood when they saw this young man jump on LaVell Edwards after the SMU game. But these are people who are unaware of the great impact that you brought to us, and I believe that the team brought to you.
Right. I enjoyed being with them.
And we enjoyed being with you, Mel. Thank you for being with us on Beyond the Game.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for watching another episode of Beyond the Game. Remember to click here to subscribe and click here to watch our recent videos. Also, please follow us on social media. And remember, go Cougs.